Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching. In this video I'm going to take you through how I've done my Death Corps Krieg from the Kill Team Octarius box in a kind of ash waste desert inspired scheme. So you see them here on the bases that I did in a previous video to match the gaming board, and what I wanted to do was take those kind of colours, reflect them into the models and kind of have not quite a camouflage scheme but something that really blended in with that kind of terrain. So if you like what I'm doing, check me out on Instagram, Adam's Hobby Stuff. Obviously like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz, and we'll crack on with this video. Well, the first thing to comment on really is the build process of these models. They are absolutely lovely. Each model you can build in 2 or 3 different ways, and then there's sub options on there with different pistols or ammo pouches, that kind of thing. So really very versatile set. Now as I went through and built it, I literally just built whatever took my fancy on each of the models as we came to them, because I will be getting some more of these as soon as they release them separately from the Octarius set. So bear that in mind if you disagree with some of my equipment choices. I will be getting more for my collection. So first stage of painting, black spray paint as an undercoat, and then I've used leadbelcher as a base, which is something I've really got into in the last year or so, about starting off from that silver base. I really like the effect. All the colours I use I'll drop in the description down below so you can follow exactly, or you can just take some inspiration. Now you can see here I made a bit of a mistake on my first layer, getting some paint on the knee accidentally there, and I've just quickly wiped my brush in some water and then wiped that paint back onto the wet palette for the next bit of paint and crack on. Now this is a technique I'm showing here for the next colour. So I've done the light brown colour and now I'm using like a off-white bone colour for the trousers. Now I'm painting 2 models at once here with the trouser layer. So I've done one model's trouser layer completely, moved on to the second model, and I'm doing this. Now the reason I'm doing 2 at once here is that it's quite a thin colour that we're working on. Now if you try and do 2 layers, 2 thin coats, which you'll need to do on these trousers, and you try and do them straight after the other, you will end up dragging the paint off that first layer. So just working on 2 at once I find quite useful to keep you interested rather than going over all 10 and then going back over all 10. And it gives enough time for the first model to dry to then go on to the second. Now that isn't a technique I would do on all the colours on these models, because most of the colours are dark enough to go straight over that base layer, but just something you might want to consider as you're doing batch painting and, you know, shorter batches. So we've worked on a mid-brown, now we've done an off-white colour on the leggings, and then I'm going on to more of an army green colour on all the pouches, the straps, the gaiters around the legs. And you'll see all 3 of these colours are actually very closely toned with each other so that it blends and looks like a uniform kind of colour and no real garish alterations. Moving on to a simple black now, and I'm doing that on the boots and also the gun casings. Now I quite frequently do quite colourful gun casings because I quite like the look of it, but with the Krieg I've wanted a more muted colour scheme, and black's an easy one to do, and you can also then use that on the gas mask pipes. I want to pick out some detail, so I'm using a brass colour. Now in this case it's retributor armour, but obviously you can use any kind of brass colour, and I'm really just picking out very few certain details. So the skulls, the Aquilas on the helmets, you've got some on the belts there as well, and the little kind of speakers that are on there. And if you really want to go down a level, pick some buttons out. Now most of the buttons, what I've done is been quite careful and missed them when I was painting the base colours on, but I wanted to focus on the ones on the chest that are little skulls. And then really that's the bulk of your base colours done, and it's now those detail pieces. So dig out the tiny brush, do the eye lenses in red is what I've done, and then do also the ends of the grenades, because base of grenades are in the brass colour, ends of grenades in that kind of red to make it look like a crack grenade type thing. And now we're onto a wash layer. So I'm using Agrax earthshade over the entire model. I'm not painting it on with a big thick brush that I normally would paint a wash on with. I'm doing it with a standard size brush, and really being careful about where it goes, because you put this on in too much volume and it will streak and make it look a bit horrible. So be very careful when you put it on. You want a decent enough layer. Look, practice on, you know, a leg if you're not quite sure, and then this is what it'll look like once the wash is dried. So really quite a nice effect, and you could absolutely stop there, but we are going to do a little bit extra. It's interesting to note at this point that the bases I've painted previously, and there's a video on the channel, so I'll put that in the description down below. I've used the same colours on the models that I did the bases. So the actual greatcoat is the same colour as the sand, and the metal is the same colour as the metal on the model, but it looks different because of what we've done and how heavy we've been with the washes, and then how heavy we've been with the next stage afterwards. So just a point to note about tying your models in on the battlefield. So now we're going and using exactly the same colours we used before, but as you can see, what I'm doing is I'm not painting the entire thing on. I'm just using slight edge highlight to hit those raised areas on the model where the cloak has folded that type of thing. So, you know, you want to cover maybe a third of the model now on those raised areas, so that you've got a highlight colour, you've got the flat areas where the wash has been on, so it looks like a second colour, and in the creased areas, in the gaps where the wash has really settled, it looks like you've got a third colour. So it actually looks like 3 or 4 even tones on all these areas now, even though actually you've only used the same colour start and at the end. So that's the point about, you know, how you put the wash on, how thick it goes on, and how it does. Now, if you're painting the trousers, you will have to do a little bit more than covering just, you know, about a third of it, because it's quite a light colour. So just to put it on the raised areas, it's going to be a bit too stark. So just bear that in mind, a little bit more than a third, maybe sort of half that area covered. And then what you might want to do is put a real thin kind of glaze type layer over the whole piece of the trousers. The rest of the model is exactly the same, just some edges, and be selective about what those edges are. So, you know, I'm not a fan of every single edge having that highlight on, but look, you might be, so I'm going to knock yourself out. But I think it has more impact just picking, you know, a few, and also it's a lot more time saving. And then we're really onto those last details that we've covered before, knocking onto the red of the eye lenses. You'll see here, looking at the melter equipped one, I've done some scorched effects on the melter barrel. That would probably add too much time into this video, but if you fancy seeing how I've done that, again, drop some comments down below if you want to see how I've done melter effects. So now the models are done, pre-varnish, what we're now doing is popping them off the bases. So I suppose for reference, what I did is I just put a tiny dot of super glue on the foot and glued it onto a spare base for painting purposes, and now we're putting them on the bases that I made in a previous video to match the octarius board. So really pop them off that base, super glue on the feet, and then drop it onto the base that you've made already. And then after they're sealed on, we'll then do the varnish layer later on. So I tend to do that quite a lot. You know, if you're doing pre-made bases, you don't want to paint them while they're on that base because you can't undercoat, etc. Now, there will be some tidying up to do, because when you pop them off the base, you've probably pulled off some of the black that's maybe around the foot, etc. So just go around and touch up and make sure you're comfortable that there's no kind of plastic showing from when you did pop them off those bases, but there generally isn't too much that you do need to touch up at this point, and just the technique that I like to use. So that is the models done. Bit of varnish, and then you can see the finished effect. So they blend in nicely with that terrain, but also stand out enough. You wouldn't think that the same colours have been used on the bases and the model, but they do blend really nicely and just look like a whole tonal mix. That's at least what I think. So hopefully you enjoyed that. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you on the next video.